Welcome to the Inside Syracuse Basketball Podcast. I'm Mike Waters. Today on the podcast, I'm joined by former Syracuse basketball player Chuck Richards. I talked with Chuck about starting his career at Army, playing with Dave Bing and Jim Boeheim at Syracuse, spending over 25 years in the FBI, and what it was like investigating the Ku Klux Klan. Chuck, how are you, sir?
Great, Mike. Doing well.
Well, that's good to hear. And you truly were maybe, one of the first real big men in Syracuse basketball history at 6'9", right?
Yes, I came as a transfer out of Army, West Point, after 2 years. And when I played, I look back on it now, I may have played maybe 3 or 4 guys bigger than me. Most of the centers in that time were in that 6'6" neighborhood, 6'7". And so, I was a big guy back in 1962 when I rolled into Syracuse.
Now, you mentioned that you transferred from Army. Why did you originally go to West Point? What were your goals?
Well, I went to my last 2 years of high school. I was at the manliest military school. And so we played at West Point both years that I was there. And, it was a fantastic honor to get an appointment there. When they started to recruit me, it was a deal with 6'9". The limit in the Army was 6'6". They didn't draft. I was 4F from the Army because I was too tall. And Westmoreland was the superintendent, and I had to PG a year at Manlius in order to get a waiver from the Secretary of the Army to even get in West Point. I was the first person over 6'6" ever to go to a military academy.
Wow.
And I played baseball and also soccer. I was a goalie in the soccer team at Army. And it just
really. I didn't know that you played. I never heard that you played soccer at Army.
Yeah, I on the varsity. Yeah, my sophomore year. Of course, freshmen couldn't play back then, but my sophomore year I started at goalie for Army, and but I could only play. I think I played maybe 7 games, and then basketball season started. So I had to leave the soccer team to go to the basketball team. But back then, everything didn't fit. Jeeps were from World War II. They were small. Tanks were small. Westmoreland used to get a laugh every time he was around me because my size and the uniforms really didn't fit that well. So it was a rugged. They only had 1 degree back then, and that was engineering. I think today they have in excess of 44 different degrees, and otherwise economics, doctor, lawyer, you can go that route. But back when I was there, it was strictly engineering, and you had to have integral calculus, to do the physics. And it was a rugged. We went to school, 5 days, 6 days. We went Saturday mornings to class, and then we'd have a parade, and then there'd be a football game, like in the fall. But it was a challenge.
Now, after being at West Point for 2 years, you decided to transfer. Why did you begin to look to transfer, and why did you pick Syracuse?
Well, to the academics, I'm more of an economics, business, accounting type person. And, the engineering, I could do it, but it wasn't my real thing. And I had it in my mind, that I would someday have a shot at playing in the NBA. And back then, there were only 9 NBA teams and only 1 team west of the Mississippi, and that was the Lakers. And so I decided I wanted to take a shot at playing pro basketball and get a degree in accounting, marketing, that sort of thing. So I left, and back in that time, I had been recruited before going to West Point by Cornell, Colgate, Norm Sloan down at the University of Florida. Really was very impressive in the recruiting bid, and then many other schools in the Northeast. And so when I got out, NYU was another one, and they had Barry Kramer and Happy Harrison.
Sure,
And
Happy.
I went down there after I left West Point twice to be with the head coach, dinner and that sort of thing. And I seriously considered it until I found out that the business school was down near Greenwich Village someplace, and I would be living way uptown, up on the Hudson River somewhere, and I'd have to take the subway to class every day. And I really didn't, I wanted a campus. And so it got down to Colgate and Syracuse, Cornell, and Florida. And I got a call from my old coach at West Point, George Hunter. I was going to make a decision on a Sunday. He called me on Wednesday, and he said, listen, I just saw probably the best guard that I've ever seen play. And he has decided to go to Syracuse with Fred Lewis. And Fred had recruited Nicoletti, Dick Abelman, Rex Trowbridge, Sam Pensile, and these guys all of a sudden parade type All-Americans and so forth. And so I went up on a Friday, I think it was, had dinner with Coach Lewis, and I didn't meet Dave then, but I was told about him and all this. And I went home, and it's only 65 miles. I'm from Poland, New York, and talked to my parents and everything. And we decided, hey, they had lost 27 in a row in 61, I think it was, or 61. Yeah. And it would be an opportunity. And then so I decided Syracuse was where I was going to go. And first time I met Dave was at Dolph Shays's summer basketball camp.
Oh, and, sure. I've heard about the tales of Dolph Shays's camp.
Yeah, Lake George. It was just outside Lake George. And Nicoletti was there, a couple of the other guys, and we got together. We would scrimmage the Nats. All the Nats were there. Larry Costello, Al Bianchi, those kind of guys. And at night, we would play for the campers. And the first night, we beat him. And, Dave, I was on the court with Dave, and it was unbelievable. He was the Michael Jordan of the time. And Dave had so many moves, and really, I'd set a pick, and 80% of the time I got the ball rolling to the basket. And Dave could have scored when we were at Syracuse. He could have averaged in the high 30s easy. And you wouldn't even know it because he was sneaky. He'd get to the foul line. He was a good free throw shooter. But what he did, he made other players much, much better, sort of like Tom Brady. I mean, if you're on the field with Tom Brady, you get excited, especially if you're an offensive guy that can catch and run. But we had a great week. Dave and I bonded together, and we moved forward, and we're captains at Syracuse. And Dave was in my wedding, and we're still very close. We get together a couple times a year, and we do a September thing in Hilton Head, and we've stayed very close.
That's fantastic. So you were hearing about Dave Bing before you even got to Syracuse from your
Yeah,
Army
yeah,
coach. That's amazing.
right.
You know, so you had to sit out 1 year, right? Even back then, did you have to sit out because
Yeah,
of a transfer?
yeah, yeah. I used to keep rebounds, assists on the bench. You know. Yes, I had to sit out a year, but again, I got to play that year. The freshmen would play the varsity and scrimmage the varsity, and so they would use me as the center, and or Fred would, and so I got to play with him and watch his moves, and same way with Coach Boeheim. Uh, Coach Boeheim was a student of the game, and playing with him, he knew how to get the ball to you. Like for a big guy, you don't want it around your knees and everything. Jimmy, from the beginning, started playing with him. Whenever he was in the game, he threw the ball in to me. I would get it at the proper position. He would get it up high so that I could use my old hook and that sort of thing. And but it was something, having come from Poland, and even though I spent 2 years in prep school, and that's another story. Going to prep school at Manlius,
Yeah.
we played freshman basketball team. We played Colgate, we played Cornell, we played Oswego, RPI, teams like that, West Point.
Sure.
So my senior year in high school, I played freshman basketball. I PG'd a year, I played freshman basketball. I went to West Point, I played 3 years of freshman basketball before I got to the varsity. There's not many guys. Of course, back then, maybe there's some around, but there are not many guys that played 3 years before they could get to the varsity and all that. But
You mentioned Jim
it was
Boeheim. You mentioned Jim Boeheim
right.
and how he was on the court. I was wondering, what were your first impressions of him, though?
Well, Jimmy has always been a student, both in the classroom and on the court. And everybody tells the story of the first time they saw him come out of the locker room when we played 5-on-5 before the season started.
Mm-hmm.
But the moment that he got on the floor, you knew he was a basketball player. And even though he was thin and not bulky, he's not going to be pushing people around. But he really knew how to play basketball. And Jimmy went to class. Back in those days, there were athletes that sometimes slept a lot. And Jimmy went to class and did well academically.
I never had the chance to meet Fred Lewis. What was Fred? What the coach that kind of put this all together? You mentioned him earlier. What was he like?
Coach Lewis was a tremendous recruiter. He had played professionally. He came from, I think, Mississippi State or Southern Mississippi, up to Syracuse, and he knew the X's and O's, practice, and so forth. He was a little maybe on the volatile side when we get to games and referees. He liked to talk to the referees during the game, and but he brought some really, really good basketball players to Syracuse and turned, the program around and got it going in the direction. And, like when he left, Jimmy took over, he had Lewis Orr and the big center
Rosie
to
Bowie.
go to start. Yeah, to start his career as a head coach. But um, Fred certainly was a good coach. You're going to have certain problems from time to time. One of the things that hurt us on occasion was, guys on the bench who would come in, make one mistake, and I've thought about it all these years since I left, because Dave and I played a lot, and
I would hope.
Coach Lewis, because I think Dave and I are the only two guys at Syracuse that have ever averaged over 20 points a game on the same team.
On the same team. Yeah.
On the same team. Yeah. That would have been my junior year. That he averaged 22 and I averaged 22.
Which is amazing.
Well, as I said, really, Mike, half of my points probably came from Dave. And because if I didn't score, I got fouled. And I was the last of Syracuse underhand free throw shooters.
Oh yeah, we have to get to this. Yes, you're right.
I shot underhand free throws, and it was very helpful. Today, so many of the athletes, I've coached AAU type basketball for 33 years, and the young players, they don't want to practice, at the free throw line. And you look at the NBA, and there are players in the NBA that, are making a lot of money and maybe could make a little bit more if they would spend a little bit of time, at the free throw line.
I agree.
On that
Where
side,
did you learn that underhand shot? The between the legs. Most folks will associate it with Rick Barry, if they recall.
Well, Rick and I were the same age, and I started shooting underhand free throws maybe in 8th grade.
Okay.
Whether it was, I couldn't make it shooting a jump shot or a one-handed free throw, or two-handed like Larry Costello, a two-handed free throw, or Dolph Shays, and I was very successful. And the idea back then was, and Rick Barry has explained it before, if you shoot an underhand free throw, the arc is much smaller, so that if the ball hits the rim, it's not going to ricochet a great distance from the rim. So you have a better chance offensively of grabbing it and putting it back in.
Sure.
You look at a guy like, say, Shaq when he shot, or Wilt with a one hand, it's no different than the 3-point shot. If it hits the rim, it may bound, way away from the basket. And so that was the philosophy back then.
All right, I gotta fill in a few gaps here for folks who don't know how successful this 6'9" center Chuck Richards was back in the 60s with his underhand shot. You made, I believe, roughly 78, 79% of your free throws, which is a really good percentage.
That's correct.
All right, and I got one more. You made 17 free throws in a game against Pittsburgh. I think it was, might have been your junior year, your first year at SU.
Yes.
That's a record that stood for over 35 years. It wasn't until Alan Griffin made 18 in I think 2000 or 2001 that record got broken. But that 18 is still the record. You're one off the record to this day.
Yeah, and I back then with that night, I missed maybe six, and I've kicked myself. It was a rough game, pushing and shoving,
Must have
and
been.
and I think I ended up with like 35 points or something like that. But I got a little tired down the stretch, and uh, I always prided myself in not missing two in a row.
Okay.
And I think I missed two in a row, towards the end of the game. And I've thought about that for 60 years.
I'm sorry. I
Pride.
thought I was
Yeah.
bringing up a good memory, not a bad one.
Oh, well, pride. I had a lot of pride in my free throw shooting.
That junior year at Syracuse, you guys went 17-8. And to a lot of folks, 17-8 might sound good, but not great. But as you mentioned before you guys got there, Syracuse had lost something like 27 in a row. The program was really bad. You guys go 17-8 and you made it to the NIT.
Right.
Back then, that was an incredible year. That was highly successful season.
The NIT people today, they sort of look maybe down at it, and the teams that don't get in the NCAA 64 or whatever.
Right.
Back then, 14 teams went to the NCAA and 14 went to the NIT. And the reason that we chose to go to the NIT was it was Madison Square Garden, the publicity, the media capital of the world for sports and basketball. And that was great teams. And we played Barry Kramer and Happy Hairston within NYU, and Barry and I had been in 1963. We were together in the summer up at another camp near Lake George, and we had 150 boys and 150 girls, and we were in charge of the basketball side of it. And Barry and I became very close, and still are. And so that game was a big game. And for me, that was the first time playing in Madison Square Garden. In the old Garden, 8th Avenue, I think it was, it sat 19,000. And I'll never forget coming out of the locker room and looking up, and there was smoke. People smoked back then. And there was restaurants or bars up there. Guys were drinking beer and leaning over the third deck and everything else, and there was smoke up there. And the thing about the court too, we got out on the court, and as you dribbled, there were dead spots because the ice, the court was over ice.
Oh my
so
God.
You had to be careful, get a rebound and start dribbling down the court. And because you'd have one dribble come high and the next dribble right around your knees. And they had the old backboards. I think the backboards go back to like 1939 or something. It was partial wood and glass.
Oh my God.
And it had a loose rim. There were no breakaway rims. And if you could get the ball up around the rim, it was going in. And so it was interesting. It was fun.
It's my kind of rim.
Yes.
Now, so you got to play your 2 years at Syracuse. Did you get a chance to play pro ball? Because that was one of the reasons you left West Point.
Right. I was drafted by the Hawks, St. Louis. They were the St. Louis Hawks then, before they went to Atlanta. And in those days, I've got the letter up in my office on the wall, and it said, we want you to come to the June get together that we're going to have. We've invited some of the players under contract and rookies for a week, and we want you to be here on such and such a date. And as far as travel is concerned, if you drive, we will reimburse you 10 cents a mile. And if you fly, pay for it, and we will reimburse you once you get here. There was no flying you out, a private jet coming to get you. Of course, back then, jets were just coming in and everything else. And so I had graduated with a business and accounting degree, and my dad was a small Chevrolet dealer. So I went back to work with him to see what was going to happen. And then I got an offer to go to Italy. Italy was just getting started. And they had a guarantee, and but the agent that was arranging it was from Philadelphia. He said, "Now, remember, Chuck, you may go a month and not get paid because they're just getting started and everything, and they tell you that they'll make up the money, blah blah blah." Well, the minimum salary in the NBA then was $6,500, and rookies were Dave's contract as a number one draft pick was around 16 grand in 1966.
Right.
And I was making more money selling cars and driving a Corvette, and my dad, was hoping that I would, take over the business, blah, blah. And so I decided, well, no, I'm not going to take a shot at that. And but a year later, Baltimore called me. I played with Wedekind Motors with Barry Kramer out of Albany, Schenectady. And we played Eastern League teams and all-star teams. We played all of the Tony Jackson, some of the old-time guys. The Harlem Wizards had a team which was like the Harlem Globetrotters and all that stuff. And so Baltimore called me and to come down. And I went down there. I had an application into the FBI at the time. I had befriended a guy and taken the test, but it had been a year and a half and hadn't heard anything. And so I went down to Baltimore. And when I got down to Baltimore, they had 26 guys, for a week. And we were housed in a Howard Johnson's motel, 4 guys to a room. And 4 guys to a room. And now these were double beds. These were not king size beds, queens. So it ended up, sleeping on the floor. And the next day, they cut a bunch of people, and I got a bed. And so that, I realized right away that this really was not going to happen. And I got accepted, Mr. Hoover, J. Edgar, while I was down there. When I got back home, I got the call that they wanted me to report. This was in June. They wanted me to report to the FBI in July. And so I decided to get out of the Chevrolet business and, move on into, as my wife said, it's time to get a real job, Chuck Richards, instead of fooling around trying to play basketball.
Well, your lovely wife, Carol, is a wise woman, very smart. So, and
Yes.
you two met at SU, right?
Yes, we did. We met at SU. She was president of Alpha Phi, and she had never really seen a basketball game in high school. She went to football, but basketball didn't do anything for her. And so I asked her if she'd like to go at a ball game, and she did come, and she sat with the parents and everybody else, but she brought a couple of books. I looked over when I was shooting a free throw, and she was reading War and Peace. And that was pretty much, she had really not a lot. She didn't know a foul shot from a pick and roll, and so, and maybe that's why we've been married 55 years. She's smart.
I'm going to show up at the next Syracuse basketball game with a copy of War and Peace and see what Jim Boeheim says.
Well, I have a lot of respect for Coach Boeheim, and he has. I don't think there will. You never say never, but to have a person play basketball at a school and end up, getting a master's and then be an assistant coach and take over head coach and stay there his whole career, because there's all sorts of money out there for guys like Coach Boeheim, and he dedicated himself to Syracuse, and he's happy there. He got a fantastic family, and he's got a couple of really good guys that I think are going to really helped Syracuse. And his daughter, she was a very good basketball player.
Jamie was. I kind of I let drop here an opportunity for a follow-up question a second ago. You mentioned that you went into the FBI.
Yes.
That became your lifelong career. You spent over 25, 27 years in the FBI.
28 years in the FBI.
Yeah. What did you, I don't know what you're allowed to tell us.
Well,
what did you do for the FBI?
Having gone to West Point, the basketball player that went in with me, a guy by the name of Chuck Hutchison, was the first guy killed out of my class of 1964. And he and I were very close. And his dad was the sheriff down near Pittsburgh in Katanning. And, the Vietnam War was going on. And I had always, in the back of my mind, did I make the right decision to leave West Point? Because, when you go there, there's camaraderie. And when you're in the military, you go through airborne ranger training together, and you cover a man's back. And I had always had an interest in law enforcement. And when the opportunity came, I never thought that I would get in, big tests and interviews and all this stuff. And then I have another deal where I was the biggest guy that the FBI had ever hired. Hoover made me take 2 physicals and monitored me through 16 weeks of training. My firearm scores, my physical, my academic scores, and but for me, I never once not wanted to go to work. I had the opportunity in the Bureau to work. I chose to work on the street instead of promotion, Washington, New York City, those kind of places. I enjoyed putting, criminals in jail and doing investigations. And I worked everything from outlaw motorcycle gangs to the Klan to bank robbery, kidnapping, extortion. I was a street FBI agent and SWAT team, firearms instructor. And that was my bag from the military. And it moved over, when I went to the FBI. And it was, it was 28 super years as far as I was concerned.
What's it like investigating the Klan?
Well, the Klan was still around when I came to the North Carolina in 1960. Let's see, 19 December of 69 is when I was transferred here. And I had 4 counties that I covered, and I covered all the violations. And they were rural counties, and there would be things like burning crosses in the yards of African Americans, their home. There were situations like that. There were actual meetings, that they had. Klan meetings. They'd have them on the weekend, and they would have 200 people show up, and make all sorts of noise and everything. And it's something that the investigations, we were able to prosecute people that were burning crosses and doing damage to businesses that were owned by African Americans. And so it was a challenge. And
Wow.
fortunately, in today's time, I'm sure, because I've been retired, I'm sure there's some activity in that area still. But the people many times didn't like the African American was a better worker, and they lost their job because an African American was a better worker, and so then they would join the Klan and all that stuff.
Wow. And firearms instructor, SWAT?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Firearms. Well, training, that's something that people like in New York State. I would say probably the FBI is the main training arm for local law enforcement in New York State. What happens is if you live in rural areas in New York State, the police don't have the money to send the policemen to special schools that you need to go to today on terrorism and things like that. And FBI agents get trained in certain areas. So I would be assigned to a sheriff's department to hold a shoot and teach them the proper way to handle a weapon, how to clean it and do all this stuff, because there were some areas where there were some individuals that had no training on how to properly handle weapons and so forth like that. And then arresting people, how to get people out of cars if you're arresting somebody, out of houses if you have to, you've got somebody barricading the house, what are you going to do? And so I would get assigned to various instructions during the calendar year. And I spent the last 10 years or so, I was in charge of all media relations with newspapers, TV, radio, and the boss would, there would be inquiries about him being interviewed or she being interviewed in Raleigh or something, and I would arrange for the interviews and so forth like that. And then I dealt with 60 Minutes. There were cases that were very important, and so I dealt with national TV people, and then human resources, recruiting. The last few years, I did a lot of recruiting at Fort Bragg, Camp Lejeune, SEAL Team, Delta Force, those kind of people, and the law schools in North Carolina, Chapel Hill, Duke,
Wow.
Campbell, and my career. If I could go back if I was a little bit younger and so forth, and pick it up again. And I got a lot of personal satisfaction out of working a case and then getting a person or persons indicted, then arrest them, take them to trial, and then convict them. A lot of people don't realize that over 90% of FBI cases are plea bargains. They don't even go to trial because we've done such a good job investigating that the defense attorney looks and says, wait a minute, you don't want to go away for 50 years, maybe 10. And so that doesn't get publicized. The Bureau has taken some hits over the last couple of years and everything with some of the administrative details, but that's why I like to stay out in the streets, sort of like out in the countryside. It's better to be there than politics.
I hear you. I got it. Well, this has just been a fascinating conversation. You're a fascinating person. I appreciate your time. I knew I was going to enjoy this podcast as much as any others I've had. And I tell you what, if things don't work out with the centers on this year's team, I mean, it looks like Jim could count on you for a few minutes here and there, maybe a few rebounds.
Well, I'd have to get in shape. I became a runner after, along with my basketball. I played seniors Olympics here in North Carolina. We won the national championship cup one time, came in second twice. And, but I ran the New York Marathon. And
like the tallest ever to do that.
At the time, I don't know if there's anybody that has run it since that's 6'9", and but it's a kind of situation that I would need to get in shape a little bit to give him at least 5 minutes. I can't give him 20 or 30 now.
Okay.
But it's
5
great.
minutes, a couple fouls, and a rebound or two.
Yes. I get the free throw line and a couple of underhand free throws.
A couple underhand free throws that are money.
That would bring the dome would go crazy, with the underhand free throws, I'm sure.
You would be a fan favorite today, I am sure. So, Chuck, listen, thank you so much for joining us here. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Well, Mike, I appreciate you giving me a call. And Syracuse meant a lot to both Carol and I. Great university, academics, and Coach Boeheim runs a terrific program. And looking forward to seeing his sons play this year.
All right. Well, I am too. We'll get that season started soon. Chuck, again, thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you.